Alright, so what we're going to do is you're going to take your puppet pattern, and if you notice, you'll have a couple things on your pattern. These are darts and they go together, as well as a grain line, which I just pointed to, and the darts go together like so. And you'll also see this seam allowance around. If you're doing any sewing by hand, you can cut that off, and if you're using a machine, leave it on like I have. And just make sure you read everything before you go and trace. Now what I like to do before I trace is I have a half-inch piece of foam that I lay down, and I just lay my pattern on top, and what I do is basically make sure that the grain line is going in the right direction before I flip the pattern. And what I do is I basically pin the pattern down using these pins with little balls on top into the foam, through the pattern, through the fabric, into the foam piece underneath, and that gives me a stable piece to trace. If your patterns are mounted on plastic or cardboard or something like that, you really don't need to do this, but if you're just using paper like me, and you will. And just make sure you take out all the pins, and you're going to flip your pattern. Now I've done the line on the other side. Yep, make sure it's not bumping into the other pattern. You want to give a little bit of space in between, but I've drew a line on here just to indicate the grain line. And you want, like I said, you want the fur to be going in one direction. And in this case, I want the fur to be going in a downward direction from the top of the head down to the neck. And again, I'm going to pin this pattern in. And it's very important that you flip your pattern, because if you don't, you'll have two of the same sides. Now I've just completed that. Now we're going to do the body, and what you want to do is make sure the grain, there's no grain line on the patterns, but make sure the grain's going from the neck down again onto your body patterns, both of them. And you don't need to trace two of each, you just need to trace one of each, because you have a back and a front. So you're going to do the same, basically pin everything down and trace it. Now it's also important that you'll notice on the top you'll see a mark center point, and to transfer that onto your pattern, so I just lay it down flat, indicate it, pick it up, and carry that line that I just drew down into the pattern, because the top piece will be cut off. And once everything's done, I like to use a razor blade, and especially for fur, when you're cutting fur, if you use a pair of scissors like I'm using now, you'll want to go close to the actual fabric itself, because if you cut just randomly, you'll cut the fur underneath. So that's why I like to use razor blades. And once I kind of pull away, because you're always going to get fur all over the place, and you'll have it everywhere. So I just kind of pull the loose fur away, and there's my one half. And what I like to do as well is go around with the little snips, and I snip about probably 1 to 2 centimeters around the entire pattern. And what this will do is when you put the two halves together, when you sew, you won't have a lot of fur caught into that seam. So I just, there you go, it's a little bit of close-up. So I go all the way around the entire puppet. I don't do the mouth or well, I do the neck, but I don't do the mouthpiece. So there you go, there's one half done. And now what you're going to do is you're going to sew the top seam. Now like I said, you put these two together like so. I showed you on the paper pattern. And what I like to do, especially if you're a beginner puppet builder, what you want to do is you'll want to pin these down, and I'll show you how to do that. You basically grab a pin and punch it through the one side and fold it down and push it through and to the other side. And I do that. This one will probably hold 2 seams. Now if you're using a sewing machine like I'm doing here, the sewing machine will go right over the pins. You don't have to worry about it getting jammed or anything. And basically, if you don't know how to use the sewing machine, they're really easy to use. You go front, go back to lock the stitch, and then go forward again. And when you get to the end, same thing, back, front. Like I said, very easy to use. I'm not going to go into a tutorial on how to use a sewing machine. I will show you a couple stitches in the next episode though, if you want to do it by hand. So there's a top, and I've done both seams so you can see. And this will be what your puppet looks like when it's done. But what you want to do is don't make this mistake. Don't start sewing the outside like this. You'll want the backs or the fronts facing each other. So the first side in, or whatever side that's going to be the outside of your puppet in. And what I do is I start from the mouth, the top of the mouth, and I start to pin. And again, you're going to push it through both, curve it back, and push it down. And there you go. Watch out for your fingers up down below. And you're going to go all the way around, and as you go around, you're going to tuck the fur in. Now some of it's going to want to poke through, but you won't let it. And you're just going to... Now the spacing between each pin that you put in, it's up to you what you feel comfortable at. And so there's the one side. This is the back side. So that's you're going to sew all the way down to there, to the neck, making sure that the two seams up top meet. And then you're going to do the same for the bottom jaw line. So tuck in everything, grab a pin, stick it through, go. And you're going to do the entire bottom jaw line as well. So there, it's all pinned. So I have the bottom jaw and around the top. And the two seams are there and there. The two seams meet, and you don't want to do... don't be pinning or sewing the mouth or the neck. So then you put it in your trusty sewing machine. I like to start from the neck first, because usually you get a jam at the beginning or the end, and 9 times out of 10 for me it's at the beginning of a sewing episode. So what I want to do is, if it screws up, I want it to be at the neck side, not the mouth main side where everybody will see. So you just basically go around. I'm doing this slow so that you guys can see. Now when you hit the seams, what you're going to do is you're going to go right over those seams. Your machine, if it's good, it'll go right over. If it's not, you might need a new needle. There, and look, it's walking right over those pins, making sure that the edge is all sewed up. There you go. There's the one side, and now we're going to do the jaw line. Get some of this fur out of the way and put it under. Now there, I've just fast-tracked that so you didn't need to see it. So once you're done, make sure you take all the pins out, and you're left with your skull, well, basically the outside skin for your puppet, with the hole for the mouth and for the neck. Now what we're going to do next is we're going to do the body part. Like I said before, you'll have both pieces. You're going to take the one side and you're going to pin them two together as well using the trusted pins. So I start from the neck top, work my way down. Here I am halfway, and there, it's done. I wish it was that easy. Now if you notice, when you flip it over, one side is longer than the other, bigger than the other. But that's just the way the pattern is. Like, it gives you a little bit of a movement within the puppet itself, so that you have some space for your hand. So don't worry about that. Just match the two, put it through, and you're going to go all the way down. Now I've done both on both sides. I just fast-tracked it, and you're going to sew. Now make sure, like I said, the fur's on the inside. You don't want the fur on the outside. If the fur's on the outside, then you're gonna get a puppet that shows all the sew marks. So I've sewed everything, and now I've taken the pins out. So that's the body part. Now here comes the tricky part for some people. I have the body and the head, and what you want to do is now attach the head onto the body part. So what I like to do is basically take the two halves of the head and push it down flat, making sure that the front seam meets the back seam. So this is the back seam here, meets the front seam. And the front seam, it should match that little mark, and the back seam should match that mark. And so what I'm going to do is put them together. Let's start with the back. Yeah, back maybe. Yeah, I keep showing the front back. Okay, so basically what you're going to do now is grab your pins again and pin these two together. Now what I like to do is I like to stuff the head down into the body, but I'll show you basically how to do that in a sec. And I'm going to put the pins in. I like to start off with the front seam, the front mark first, and do the two sides. And this is really important. You want to get the head perfectly centered in the body. If it's out of joint a little bit, if it's a little bit turned, when you put on the puppet, it won't feel uniform to your hand. It'll feel all crooked, or the mouth will be a little bit off center. And it's really key to get the head center of the body, especially when you're performing too, so that the eye line is correct. When you're performing, you know where sort of the eye line is. And if it's all out of whack, it just feels gross. So I went all the way around, and like I said before, usually I put the head in, but I wanted to show you what it looks like, and then I'm gonna put the head, if I can, without. Yeah, I'm gonna have to take out a couple. Not to worry. I'll just redo that back in. So with a lot of sewing machines, you'll notice that there's like a little piece that you can take off that usually stores all the bobbins and everything, and you can usually slip this on, but with mine you can't. So I can there's a couple of options. One is to sew by hand using a whip stitch all the way around, and I'll show you in a tutorial later how to do a whip stitch, or I can just go around very carefully, and what I do is I inch it very slowly. Now this is really difficult because you want to try to make sure that the two pieces don't separate, and at the same time you have equal distance around that you're sewing right along the edge line there, because once you go off, that's when it starts to get all discombobulated. But that's when it gets all sort of out of whack, and you could have the back piece higher than the front and that sort of thing. So I'm going to back, and you're going to meet where your thread line is. So I took out all the pins. Make sure you do that, or you're going to feel it when you put it on. And I just checked the seam just to make sure that it's even all the way around. And there you go. And his head should be sort of in the middle. The mouth, the hole should be in the middle of the body. So if you have any other questions, give me an email at tom@thecreatureworks.ca.